I am sitting here today with Fianna Fáil's Minister for Agriculture, Marine and Fishery, Charlie McConalogue.
Good to see you. Good to be with you, Emma. Thanks.
Thanks very much for joining us here. We have a couple of issues, mostly surrounding Donegal, which is your area anyway. So we're going to start off with one of the biggest issues for Donegal, which is the defective concrete blocks.
Yes.
You know that they launched their people's document. I believe you were in Brussels at the time.
Yeah.
And they're saying that the scheme's not working for them. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, listen, this is the biggest issue in the county, and it has been throughout. For the vast majority of my time in politics, it emerged shortly after I got elected. I think it was 2013 when I saw my first house, and it became a bigger and bigger issue over time, and particularly the last while. And obviously then there was the previous scheme that was put in place by the last government, and that was shown up to have, to have many flaws and to not be adequate in any way. And one of the key, since since I've been at cabinet and since the last election, and indeed I was the only one to have it, and was only my own party was the only party to reference the moving on and back in the Mike issue in our manifesto at the last election. And I think many took it in good faith at that stage back 4 years ago that there was a scheme coming, but and agreed, but that certainly wasn't the case in terms of its efficacy. So listen, this has been the biggest issue I've dealt with the last 3 or 4 years, and I have worked massively hard and worked with all of the team in my own party, their councillors and Senator Dáil Éireann too, collectively to do everything possible at government level to get the scheme and to get a new scheme in place, to get the legislation in place that was going to underpin that scheme, and to get it as strong as we possibly could, and then to get the regulations in place then after that, which saw the implementation of the scheme effectively and it launched, and then working with Donegal County Council to make sure in terms of how it's rolled out, that it gets rolled out as promptly as possible. Now the challenge and the reality has been each step of the process has been challenging. Each step has been trying and a massive undertaking and has been too slow each part of that time. But thankfully we've got to the stage now where the new scheme is in place and is operating, and more people are getting onto it every day. And I am because I've been across this from the very start, right throughout, and I have elbowed and scrumped and fought right throughout the process at government level to get this to where it's at. So I'm very much aware of all of the aspects that are in it. I'm also aware of the challenges that are there. But I'm very confident that it's a very strong scheme, and that we have got something which is going to and has the capacity to deliver for people. The challenge now is to make sure that it does that. What we have is many people now actually on the scheme, and over the last, since it really didn't start until last September, October, where people who'd commenced their work, and some actually had finished their work under the old scheme, but people who are by and large commenced their work at that stage got transitioned onto the new scheme, got their new grant rate, and got to the new system. But then there was administrative rollout challenges for Donegal County Council in relation to the processing of that and some of those are still getting ironed out at the moment. But people now are in that scheme and getting and availing of it, and we're working to continue to make sure that it can impact for people. Now it's based on, and the key thing, because this is going to be something that's been with us for many years, because of the scale of it. The key thing was to make sure that we got a scheme which could adapt year on year to reflect what the reality was in terms of the evolving cost of construction, etc. And what it's based on now is independent advice from the chartered surveyors, which are the same people that advise insurance and the benchmark for industry. They advise the government what the rates should be, and that's what was applied. And then each year going forward, that can adjust so that it's reflecting what's happening in reality. And the rates that are there now are based on their advice last year in relation to what the rate should be. And in terms then of the overall scheme, obviously this is a maximum cap of €420,000. The previous one was 275. And also it's based on the rates of the day as well, as opposed to a designated rate.
And what about people who are saying that they are facing shortfalls of 80, 100,000, 120,000 in one case, where they're saying that, they have to get bridging loans. Some can't get bridging loans. And they're saying that there's no emergency accommodation available. I mean, I believe there's a family at the moment who are going to have to live in 2 separate caravans. I know a lady with MS who's having to live in a mobile home until her house is rebuilt. We know that 1 in 7 families who have defective concrete blocks have somebody with a disability in their home, and that they're struggling to get accommodation because we have an accommodation crisis, as we know. And these families are saying that, where are they supposed to get this sort of money to meet this shortfall? Yeah,
and listen, the accommodation challenge and the accommodation while the work is ongoing is a real challenge. And that's because we're in the midst of a general accommodation crunch. And that's been growing over the last number of years. And that's something at government level as well, in terms of putting significant investment into the county, in terms of new social housing, we're investing very significantly in. But there's no easy solution to that, because we're trying to build houses as quickly as we possibly can. Now, what the scheme does provide for is up to €15,000 towards the cost of rental accommodation while it's ongoing. But that is a challenge. There's no two ways about that. In relation then to the cost of build, and people are very fearful of this. And the challenge is there's about 50 houses completed now. There's I think it's in the region of up to 100 or so which are under construction. I must check the most recent, but it's changing and improving all of the time. I know from terms of people that actually are in the scheme at the moment that builders are and can do the work for the rates that are advised by the Chartered Surveyors and do so profitably. Now, there is a challenge then where houses are particularly large over the 420 cap, because once you go over the 420 cap, or if you're taking the accommodation out of that is 15,000 as well, once you go over that, and if the house is larger, that is a challenge, because the scheme only covers you up to that level. And if your house is larger than that, obviously that's a challenge. But I know it is working for many people that are in the scheme at the moment. And the objective now is to make sure that as it moves on and as more and more people get into it, that the cost adjusts to reflect what the market reality is of the day. The other thing we should do as well is in terms of looking to see how we can increase the supports to people who need the supports to be able to work through the scheme. And we'll have to monitor as it goes. But the key objective is to get as many onto it and as many building and as many supported as possible. But there is a great concern and anxiety out there, because many are hearing, people saying, oh, well, I need 100 or whatever. And they're very afraid, well, what does that mean for me? And also there's a big variety in relation to some of the quotes that people are getting. But what I do know is that in relation to the cost of building, the people, whenever they're underneath the 420 cap and our houses of that size, they are getting very close, if not the cost by and large very significant covered, and many are very close to it. And that's the reality for those that are in it. But for some it is higher than that. Yeah. But at government, and what I've worked to do as minister, and what I've worked with our own team, and I have to say the Fianna Fáil team, the county, have been across this and have broke our back to get this as strong as it possibly could. And we continue to do that. Our objective is to get as strong a scheme as we possibly could. And as it goes forward, we'll try and see how it can, if there's ways it can be approved and as ways it can be monitored as well.
Okay. And what about the emergency disability housing because for example, if you have somebody who is in a defective concrete block home and they are a wheelchair user, and that would sort of be my portfolio, is raising awareness for disabilities and people with complex needs. Some parents are saying who have children with complex needs that how are they supposed to live in a mobile home that is not going to be wheelchair accessible? They can't live in a caravan. So what's going to be put in place for these people?
That's a challenge. And listen, I mean, the scheme, so we have 50 done, we have about 100 underway or so. That's something we have to look further at. The objective is to be to get it, and everybody knows how hard it has been to get it up and running. And there's so much more to come in this. There's thousands of properties to come where we have only dozens done. And the objective is to get the scheme operational, get as many onto site and moving through it as possible. There are those challenges. The scheme is for a replacement of existing houses, not to build it alongside or separate to it. So that poses a challenge to people who maybe who have a disabled house, for example, and are rebuilding a disabled house, and that's obviously, while it's hard to get accommodation for everyone, it's particularly more difficult for those. And working with the County Council and the HSE, we have to look further to see what can we do there to support those type of families in those situations. It's a challenge for everyone, accommodation, but it's a particular challenge whenever you need a certain type of property. And you're moving out of a property which was suitable to your needs and is being rebuilt and to your needs, but where that is an issue, and that's what. But there's been so many aspects to this, so many challenges to this. It is a monster of a challenge. It's a monster of a challenge for every family. It has been a trauma. It has been a monster of a challenge politically to get it all operational and to get it to where we continue to work hard at it. We're now thankfully at a stage where every week more and more people are getting their grant, they're getting their approvals, they're getting their, the housing agency as well are dealing with it, and it's moving up. But we have to try and make sure that it works as effectively as possible now as it moves on to.
Would you agree that it is the biggest humanitarian issue to face Donegal?
I would. I don't think. And obviously, this is in other counties as well, not to the same extent as it is here. But there's been no issue like this that I can think of which has had the impact which this has had in our county anywhere else. This is unprecedented, and it's unprecedented in terms of what the response has been to and what has been the response that is needed.
Okay, so moving on to the healthcare in Donegal. I know your portfolio is agriculture, marine and fisheries, but people would say you're the sitting minister for Donegal.
Yeah.
So last year Letterkenny was reported in the media as 11 out of the 12 months for being overcrowded.
Yeah.
No beds available. We have no sitting neurologist. We have paramedics who had one ambulance over the Easter weekend for the initial area, which is the size of County Louth. They have, when somebody goes on leave, they don't have the capacity to fill that space. 5,300 people were admitted to Letterkenny Hospital last year without actually having a bed, which means they were either in a trolley or a trolley chair. 1,200 left the emergency department without actually receiving treatment. They were there so long. I spoke with many people over the last couple of weeks. One man in particular was there with his daughter. He was 19 hours sitting on a trolley chair with a suspected minor stroke, apparently. That's not to say that he didn't have that, but I can't confirm it. But I saw another little girl, 8 years of age, up from County Clare with her mom visiting the mother's ill mother, and she was brought in with an abscess in her face. She was in agony. They didn't know if they were going to admit her or not because there was some deliberation whether she was going to be transferred. So they couldn't actually allocate her a bed. So this child was put in 2 chairs end to end and given a blanket in the A&E department.
Right.
And people are talking about the fact that their bloods are being taken in corridors. Their personal and private medical history is being discussed with them within earshot of other people. And to some people that mightn't bother them, but for some people they find that extremely intrusive.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what's going wrong, do you think? What is going wrong with the investment in healthcare in Donegal?
Yeah, there's real capacity challenges there now, Emma. There's no two ways about it. Now, there's also a lot that goes right, and there's a lot in terms of service, which has improved significantly and continues to improve across many services. And we're seeing that now in terms of people's, higher life expectancy, higher well-being as well. So there's a lot the health service gets right, and that obviously doesn't get covered because that's not but there's also a lot that is wrong and which we need to work to address. And the particular challenge there is around admissions and around A&E capacity as well in particular. And it is, you're right, I'm Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine, but as a TD for our county and as a Minister of the Cabinet Table for our county, this is a big priority and something I push very hard on all of the time. And there's very significant investment going into the county to try and increase capacity and to try and improve it into the future. Now, for example, let's say in Letterkenny Hospital, since I've got into government back 3.5 years ago, we've seen an increase in beds. There's over 50 extra beds there now. Before this government came in, there was actually 15 beds which were in the hospital closed. I remember making a big issue out of that in opposition. They were reopened and new beds added. So it's just under 50, I think now, which has been increased in the hospital. And in the last 3.5 years, we've seen 20% extra staff employed in the hospital, which is a very, very significant increase in 3.5 years, 20% extra. And that is leading, and there's more people being treated now, and there's more admissions, and there's more happening. And there's an expansion of services as well. But there's still big challenges. And there's particularly big challenges at A&E. So we are working to try and address. We want to see the extra staff that we put in and the investments put in show results. And the Minister has put in place a high performance team there to work as well with management to see how that can be translated. And we continue to support the hospital strongly. The other thing that's happening, and that's been happening very significantly in the last 2 or 3 years, is at primary care level. To increase the capacity at primary care to take the pressure off the main hospital. So we've invested in an unprecedented way in terms of new staffing and new infrastructure, new primary care centres across the county. So in McConalogue, for example, just a few months, like last year, we opened new primary care centre in McConalogue. It's like a hospital in terms of its scale. Also, we opened a new one in Newton Cunningham.
Yeah.
Also, there's also then in relation there's new, a very significant new one in Donegal town opened just in the last few months. One in Dunfanaghy and others across the county as well. So that's significant. We're trying to staff those up. There are staffing challenges, and we know that. Particularly, for example, in the child
disability network team, which is around 62%,
which is
vacancy,
which is 62% vacancy, and that's because we are recruiting all the time to try and get. That's because we can't get the people.
So, do you think it's that the recruitment issue is not? Are you saying that it's not that you aren't willing to recruit these people? You just can't get people to come to Donegal.
And it's not just that's not just a Donegal thing, because actually, in terms of the child teams, the children's support teams, disability network teams, there's a significant vacancy issue nationally in those across the country, including in Donegal. So it's an issue, and we've been working hard, and the HSE have been, and doing very proactive work there to try, for example, in relation to, as people go into training, support people to access the courses, support people to access the courses on the basis that they come back to work in these roles. But we're recruiting the challenge, and that has having an impact on children accessing services, because we're struggling to get people to fill those roles. But that is the capacity is increasing across primary care all of the time through that, and then also in terms of, for example, the new community hospital, likewise being built in Letterkenny, which the construction started on a few months ago. As the single largest investment in our county in many years in healthcare, with €60 million being invested there for a new 110-bed hospital, which will be across the road from the current Letterkenny hospital, again to increase capacity. So we're investing massively to try and address it, but there's challenges.
Yes.
And we also and we're putting a particular focus at the moment to try and make sure that the return in terms of the performance and the output is reflecting the increased investment. But listen, every person that goes through the door, and nobody likes waiting in their life for anything.
Yeah.
It's one of the things we don't like to do. Whether it's the last place you want to be waiting is when you're sick, or you're sore and you're injured, or you're worried about yourself and you're in a hospital. Like whatever, but waiting for something to get into a queue for something somewhere in a normal everyday life. The last place you want to be is when you're least able to do that, which is when you're sick and you want to get. And that's just something we have to keep trying to address, because that is too often the situation in many of our hospitals, including Letterkenny at the moment, in relation to A&E.
Okay. I'm sure that's still recording then, if you was it. Good girl. Right, so moving on to so agriculture. You are the Minister for Agriculture. We've seen a lot of reports this week that say there is a crisis in farming, that was the wettest March for many a year.
Yeah.
Farmers are saying that they can't get crops out of the ground and they can't get crops into the ground. They are saying that they need more subsidies. Haskell Donoghue is saying that he has no more left to give the Department of Agriculture. So you come from a farming background yourself, I believe, so you would be aware then of what these farmers are facing. How do you intend to support them as the Minister for Agriculture? If Haskell Donoghue is saying I can't give any more, and these farmers are saying we're in crisis mode, we're on our knees. Like one farmer said this week, he said it was, the strongest man left would be standing. He said, and we're about ready to fall. So what's going to happen to these farms and these farmers? Yeah, so listen, it is a really, really difficult spring. And we're now into the second week in April, and there's been record rainfall, and there's very few animals out on the ground, and also particularly from a crops and tillage point of view as well. The normal growing season is moving on quickly, and crops haven't been sown, and it's very stressful, and that's very difficult. And farming, increasingly over the last generation, has become a more solitary profession. Previously in farms, the generation before last, you'd had one or two or three maybe on a farm, and now farmers are very often working on their own. And if you're going out in the morning and your cows are still in when they would normally be out, and you're minding them, and pressure's piling up, you don't know when you're here in the rain at night, and or an animal ends up sick. That's the farmers to do all that on his own, and that's a very pressured situation. And likewise, if you're waiting to get the crops in,
and you're on your own, and you're not getting there, and you're wondering what's going to happen. So it's a tough time, and it has been a long winter, because since up until the end of June last year, really, we were pretty much in a drought situation, and we were very worried about a drought. I remember the Farmers Journal at that stage, actually one of they do weekly cartoons, and the one they had at the end of June last year was myself and officials moving around the Child of Prague to try and bring rain. That because there was a drought. So there was but from that point, the weather broke at the end of June last year, and it has been so wet since that. We had a really bad summer and a really bad autumn, a very difficult harvest, and in many cases farmers had to house back in September, so therefore we're looking at potentially a 7-month housing period for many, for in many cases. So I'm working at the moment to support farmers through this. I have established a national fodder committee with all farm representatives and stakeholders on that to manage the situation and to advise me as well on it. They met last Friday. The assessment is that there is enough fodder in the country, around the country, and in the different regions, but there's some farmers that are short and running out. So the immediate challenge now is to work at local level to try and make sure that those that have a surplus give support to those that are running short. So that's where we're at the moment. But it's something I'm going to continue to monitor closely, because we don't know how many more days or weeks are involved in this. Yeah. Also, then I've called a halt to inspections, other than those that are necessary to actually finish payments to farmers as well in the short term. So, and I'm on it, that committee will meet now again next week. The significant step I also took then was last year, because this is the type of thing I always want to avoid. And always want us to be as prepared as possible for. So what I actually did last year was I ran a fodder scheme last year, because it was a particularly challenging time for costs with the fertiliser and the Ukrainian war impacting. So I ran a scheme for farmers whereby I paid up to €1,000 per family farm for farmers to cut up to 25 acres of fodder, because I wanted to make sure that the high costs that were there didn't mean people took a chance or tried to just match it up exactly, and therefore if we had a long winter that we would be short on it. Now what we've had is actually one of the longest winters in living memory, because it's running from September until April, but there was a very strong uptake of that fodder scheme I ran last year, which meant actually that farmers did grow good strong stocks last summer and into last autumn, and it maximised and incentivised people to do as much as possible. So that means, thankfully as of now there's stock across the country, fodder stock. It's a matter of matching it up. But I am going to watch it closely now and monitor closely and deliver support as we feel necessary, and I'll monitor that as well as to what is going to be necessary. Obviously, I have a budget for the year. Yeah. There's no new budget coming up. There doesn't be any budgets in between times. So
are you saying that there will be no subsidy available?
Well, so what I'm going to have to do now is see what the situation is. See what right now the support we need to get to farmers is those that have the fodder to be able to make it available to those that don't, right, and to provide support around that. And I've tasked Teagasc with that job and providing that support. But then as it evolves, I'll keep watching it. And if this becomes something then, which means that I have to look within my budget to see, well, do I reallocate? Do I decide, within the budget I have, is there a bit more of a priority here now to do something with this than there is for something else? Then that's when we'll look at. But right now, the biggest priority is helping those that.
What about TD? Did you hear TD Michael Healy-Rae when he was on talking about the crisis for farmers? He said that payments are being massively delayed, that they are stuck in the system, that they need to be paid, that this would at least alleviate some of the pressure. And he said the time for observing is over, and action is needed now. What would you say to that?
Well, what he didn't know, maybe he didn't know or missed, is that payments were being delayed, particularly in relation to one scheme where the payments were being delayed was the Acre scheme, which is a new scheme and a very popular one that I set up. And they were being delayed because there's real challenges with the IT system in the department in relation to that. And it meant many people, and for example, with 5,000 farmers, we're one of the biggest counties in the country for the uptake of that scheme. We've nearly 6,000 farmers actually in Donegal availing of it. And the average payment is expected to be €5,500. So many of those weren't getting payments because of the IT delays. So what I did actually was about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and this is the first time this ever happened, I directed my officials to make an interim payment to each and every farmer who hadn't up to that point been paid. And those interim payments I made to farmers were the average of what farmers were being paid. So all farmers in the country that hadn't been paid at that point either got €4,000 or €5,000 paid to them about 4 weeks ago. And they've all received that now. That was the one scheme which hadn't been, which there was delays in relation to. So thankfully those farmers have got it. Actually, some of those farmers will have been overpaid and will have got more money than what they'll end up getting, because I wanted to give as strong and as high a payment as I could to inject support to people. So what will happen in those that are getting more than what they'd have been due is that it will be simply balanced off against payments that would be coming to them at the end of this year. So, but it means they would get forward paid. But for the others, I wanted to get a strong payment out to them. So everybody now in acres has got that payment. And then across all the rest of the payments, we've into the high 90% of people that would have got the payments that are due to them. And the only inspections, for example, that are allowing to happen now in the next 2 or 3 weeks are those that are necessary to finalise those payments. So I have already acted on that, and I think he's it'd be right to say that payments that we can release, we should, but I've done that, and we're also expediting any that might be remaining too. So
we are due to get a new Taoiseach next week. Minister Simon Harris is now the leader of Fine Gael. It's all but set in stone that he will be the Taoiseach next week. What do you say to the calls for a general election?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, in no general election do you ever elect a Taoiseach. No general election. It's not like the United States of America where you elect the president, or France where you elect a president. Who's the head of government as such. In Ireland, what we do is that we elect a Dáil.
Yes. And
the Dáil is elected then for 5 years. And that's where the democratic mandate from the public comes.
Yes.
And the public gives that a 5-year mandate. And as long as that Dáil functions effectively with an effective government, that's a 5-year mandate to have. And certainly it has been the approach of my party, and I think rightly so, that you serve out and you serve the mandate that you were given. So what we have now, obviously, there's a change coming out of the last election. There was a 3-party government. It wouldn't have been necessarily what we would have hoped for going into that election, but you have to work with the Dáil that's there, put together a government. And it certainly would seem, not just in terms of the majority the government has itself, but there's a number of others outside of the government who will strongly elect Simon Harris as the new Taoiseach. From a Fianna Fáil point of view, and from my point of view then, we have agreed a programme for government for the 5 years with key issues to deliver on. And we want to deliver on all of those.
Yeah,
so that work
Sinn Féin have said that, I don't know if you've seen the ad that they have going at the moment.
I haven't actually.
Where they have audio and video clip of Micheál Martin saying he had no confidence, and that's why the last government was collapsed. That he had no confidence in Minister Harris, and they're saying that this is a flip flop now. Would you?
No, well, I mean that was at the end. That was one of the reasons that the last government collapsed, and there was an election after that, and the public decided then. And then we as parties had to act responsibly after that in terms of putting together a new government and putting together an agreement as to how you do that, and then delivering on it. And certainly Minister Harris, in terms of how he would have taken the country as Minister for Health through COVID, would have done a very strong job there, and he's been shown himself to be very able in other aspects. And likewise, I think this government, as a 3-party government, has worked very strongly. Like I have to say, it has been a privilege to be a member of it. The reason I got into politics is to be in government, not to be in opposition. Listen, when I'm in opposition, I'll dish it out as strong as anyone could, because that's the job. But there's plenty around that actually only ever want to be in opposition, where they only ever want to be dishing it out and not taking any responsibility. And there's a few, but that's not necessarily not my approach, or that's certainly not my party's approach. Our objective is always to get in and to actually do the best we can to make as significant a real impact as you can within what is possible. So the objective now, and that the 3 parties actually have worked well, and there has been strong trust and working relationships while we're all different. And I've witnessed governments in the past where people are constantly, trying to undermine one another and wasting and using up energy, pulling governments apart. This government actually is functioning very constructively. So and the objective now for the next year is to continue to deliver on that programme for government, and then to go to the country next time around. And I look forward, in terms of Sinn Féin, I look forward to taking them on at the next election, because I think there's no bigger
what do you think that
party out there for talking the talk and for bluffing people than Sinn Féin, and I'll certainly go toe to toe with them when it comes to election campaign.
So are you saying that you will definitely be running in the next general election?
Absolutely.
Because there is a rumour, floating around Donegal that you're not running because you're going to Europe.
No, I certainly am running in the next election, and I look forward to it, and I will relish it, because I've worked hard. I've worked to deliver massive investment for this county. The reason I ran to be a politician in Donegal was to get into government and to have all the hardship that goes with that, but to have the capacity that goes with that to really deliver. And if you look across our county, whether it's the health services, whether it's delivering the MICA scheme, whether it's delivering for our piers and harbours, whether it's delivering for our farmers, I've worked hard to deliver for the county. And I continue to do that for the next year. And when it comes then closer to the election campaign, I'll then go on the platform of what we've done over the last 4 or 5 years, contrast that to what other parties might be offering, and also put the platform forward for the next 4 or 5. I'm just over a cold yesterday. For the next 4 or 5 years, then after that as well. Mm-hmm. And I think we will have a strong track record of delivery, and I, as Minister for the county, will have had as well. And I believe we will be able to put forward a platform as well that we are the party, and I want to be back in the cabinet again next time around to continue to deliver for the county. I think when you contrast that to other parties, there's many of them that are very good at opposing, but they don't have much to show for it. And I look forward to going toe to toe in terms of having that debate with all of those candidates come the next election.
Perfect. Thank you very much for joining us today, Minister McConalogue.
Thanks, Emma.
Appreciate it.
And thank you for your wonderful work and advocacy particularly on behalf of the health sector and disability sector in Donegal as well. You're a credit to your family, and thank you for doing this work here as well.